Hey X, as I'm aware, you are interested in the occult, so I'd like to share my story with you. To start out with, I cannot divulge my name, nor the specific area that this took place in. But to start out, I was born in 1981 in a community in the East US mountains. I had 2 brothers and 1 sister. This place I was born was where I stayed. It was much like a compound. A few dozen acres of land with a similarity to a tiny town. All buildings, give or take a few, were confined to one area of this land. This was called Main Street. It consisted of 10 houses, a large church-like building, and the workshop, with 5 of the 10 houses containing a small section of land dedicated to farming and the raising of livestock. They looked like typical homes. Didn't know what that meant back then. And there were no roads, just grassland and some tilled land, and the surrounding areas were mostly woodlands, give or take a few gardens, gathering areas, and buildings, but those will be talked about later. That being said, you can imagine it was very old school. We had no electrical devices or modern conveniences. The temple ran power from a generator, and work was confined to chores and such. Now, being raised here, and all of her children, we were told that was it. There was nothing else outside our walls, and that any attempt to look beyond would be punished by God, or we'd be carried away by those who sleep in the trees. My early childhood, I don't remember too much, maybe because I blocked it out, or just couldn't remember, but I guess it was slightly normal. My mother and father were distant, didn't have that family vibe I see so much. It was much like they were the controllers of the household, and children were meant to obey. They didn't seem to love each other, and my father was the final word of law when it came to our home. Around the ages of 4 or 5, I began to go to the teachings, kind of like school, but instead of any actual subjects, we were groomed to be part of our home. This consisted of constant drilling of our doctrine. It was passed down to us from what was simply called the Book of Knowledge. Much like the Bible, it held stories and spoke of Vidin's Plegum, or God or seer. We were told that the seer was a great entity, held out of reach of the realm of man, and was sealed away there years ago by man himself. Stories spoke of our community, or chosen, who had apparently been around for centuries, and sometimes said that it came before man, and soon it would be the time that the seer would once again walk the land of man, and our people would be his devoted followers. The book went on and on. We sang songs, much like Christian church, more of a chanting, and each day of the teachings began with a test of faith. We would bow to the teacher and kiss her shoe, and was preceded with a vow of devotion. There were 13 families within our home, most of which had multiple children, majority of which were male. I was the oldest of my siblings, and because of that, held most of the household chores, as well as devoting myself to helping the community, farm work, and polishing watchers, which were small statues of creatures placed at the foot of every house that the book said would protect the chosen people from harm, and even protect them in battle. Each one looked different, and all were treated as actual people, talked to, given small offerings of food at night, and even kissed by the women. At the age of 8, the children were allowed to enter the Temple of the Seer. It was an odd-shaped building, kind of looked like the White House, just a lot smaller. The outside was covered in watchers, and was painted a weird gray color. The entrances were bolted shut on the inside, and the gathering area was a large circle, upon which everyone in the community could sit together. Now, just so you understand, the community was run in a hierarchy. There were 3 elders, all male, and 1 mother, female elder, who was also ran teachings. She was highly respected, sometimes more so than the male elders. The temple was run with the 3 elders sitting in the middle, and mother sitting behind them, and all of the community were circled around. As I was told to keep awareness high, those who attended the gatherings were adorned in white robes, children in gray robes, male elders in black robes, and mother in a red robe. Temple was a lot like the teachings, except they had more chanting, and so forth and so on, and were held every evening at dusk. Every 5th day, we were to meet at the temple, and an animal, usually a goat, would be sacrificed to the seer. Its throat was cut with a large dagger, and the elders would place a circle on their head with the animal's blood. The rest of the community, children included, were made to go up and kiss the circle of blood upon their heads. This too was a test of faith. Afterwards, the animal would be cooked, and the entire town, well, whatever the animal could feed, would cook and eat and be together, kind of like a cookout. As I got older, I noticed the adults, after temple, would go off in secret. I never did find out what went on, but there were stories whispered around the children that there was a small room underneath the gathering area which the adults gave sacrament, which none of us knew what that meant. Nearing my 10th birthday, my younger brother, let's call him David, was caught trying to go to the edge of the property. I remember that my parents were furious, and he was quickly caught and brought to the temple. He was missing for 3 days, and came back bruised, and his clothes were covered in blood. David, while my parents were around, was made to wear a sack around his head, only allowed to be lifted when he was eating. David, after he was punished, never talked again. We shared a room, and he would often wake up screaming, but he never told me why. He just shook, paralyzed with fear, and eventually fell back asleep. I tried to take care of David, but he always stayed in a perpetual state of, like deer in headlights. This scared me to the very core. I did not know what they had done, but I knew it was bad. I feared that one day they might do it to me, and began to think about escaping. There was talk, and even stories from the adults, that some who got punished never came back. Later that year, they found someone who was unholy, wandering the property. This was an amazement to all of the kids. We were taught that there were no outside people. We saw a man, carried away with a bag on his head, screaming and pleading. He was taken to the temple, and I never saw him again. Things began to take a turn for the worst, and you could tell the adults were getting paranoid of what we weren't told. In fact, we were told more and more that the time was coming, and that we needed to prepare as a whole. More often, animals were given a sacrament, even to the point, toward the end of the year, no one could eat meat. We had exhausted it all. A lot of stories came out of that time, but none I really wished to talk about. At the age of 13, the children were deemed ready and adult. We were put through testing. This was perhaps the most terrifying moment of my life. On my birthday, I was blindfolded in my sleep and carried to one of the gathering areas in the woodlands. I was told to stand completely still. The adults and elders were to stand around me as I'm blindfolded and bound with my hands behind my back. And as I was blindfolded, they all stood there, lifeless, all adorned in black robe. Mother came toward me, and I cried and cried. I was forced to do something I did not want to do, and the spilling of the seed somehow was told to be manhood. I will never forget that moment. The stares. Some even smiled. After that, I was given a bottle of water and was told I had to stay in the woods for 3 days and face the trials of the seer. And if I am to return home before those 3 days, I would be severely punished. So I wandered the woods, hungry and dehydrated for the whole 3 days. And during those 3 days, I came up with my plan for leaving and vowed, once I returned, I would gather as many children as possible and leave the community. The day I returned, I was celebrated. Everyone adult I saw smiled and congratulated me. All I could see was the vile smirks on their face from the woods. I began to talk to my siblings that night about leaving. I told them we needed to act fast. David shook his head and went to sleep. While my other brothers and sisters completely refused, I tried to convince them, but they threatened to tell our parents. I knew they would never go for it, and I cried as I tried to tell them what happened. I wanted nothing more than to just get them out of there, so they never had to witness what I witnessed. I knew once they refused, the other children would as well, so I decided I would come back for them. I didn't know if I would be hurt, but I knew I had to leave. I packed my things in a small sack and ran as hard as I could for the border of the property, which I had found during said trials. It was a terrifying night. I rested for a time, but became too fearful that I would be caught, and I kept running. I ran until I could run no more, and finally, early the next morning, made it out of the property. I found that not too far from where I ran, there was a dirt road that eventually led up to the compound, and I guessed the other way led somewhere else. So I traveled for 2 days on foot, until I saw something I will never forget. It was a man on a bicycle. He saw me. He asked me why I was out there, and then quickly brought me to the nearest town. I stayed in the local police station for days, but I was so shocked by what was around me. I did not talk to anyone. I didn't know who they were, what was around me. I was in complete shock of the outside world. About a week later, I finally talked about what happened, and the police went to investigate the community. Apparently, the cops had known it existed, but could never prove what went on, or what was on the property. By the time they got there, they said the property was completely abandoned, all except for a few children, which were taken back with me. I never heard more about it. I never saw the other children again, and was interviewed for years later. Shortly after that, I was put into a foster home, but was just deemed too problematic and went out on my own at 18. I was tortured daily by my memories, by everything I witnessed, by the thoughts of my siblings, and the face of the community was still out in the world. I went to therapy for most of my life after that, and actually still do from time to time. I have yet to have a relationship and always keep to myself. At the age of 21, I had a small apartment, worked an average job, etc. And one day, in my mail, there was a small piece of cardstock with the red circle the elders adorned their forehead with. I got those for a long time, during random times of the year, and had my place broken into twice, but nothing was stolen. Eventually it stopped, and I have led sort of a normal life since then. I have not spoke about this to anyone I've met outside here, and most of the time I don't speak at all, but I've learned much about other occults, and just wanted to share my story as well, to anyone out there who is seeking answers like me. I hope one day, all involved in my childhood are caught, and maybe then I can have a moment of peace, and maybe even begin to live. Thank you for listening. In total, there were about 18 children. 5 came back with me. I was told not to divulge specific information for a while, as this case was still under investigation, technically. I haven't been to the area for about 8 years now. I was told they had demolished the area and found new evidence. Live on the outskirts of a tiny mountain town in Kentucky. Main part of the town is at the base of our tinier mountain. One road swerves up mountain, houses spaced every couple of 100 yards. At the top is a reservoir / man-made lake, stocked with plenty of fish. River flows down the mountain, from reservoir, through town, and into a larger natural lake. My house is the second highest on the mountain. River flows right through my backyard. Best friend, Leroy, lives up the road in the highest house. Fishing with Leroy in the woods, between our houses back in May. Around midnight, 1 a.m., perched on a rock midstream, 2 or 3 lines at a time, deep river. Leroy sitting over the river in the branches of some trees, trying to get some carp to come out of the roots and bite. Crazy mad howling from deeper in the woods. Leroy nearly falls out of the tree. Howling, followed by growling and snarling. couldn't be more than a couple hundred of yards away from us, downstream. Leroy and I flash our lights at each other, stare at each other, listening for 5 or so minutes. Finally, Leroy says, "Damn, that was one hungry bobcat." We laugh. I'm still scared shitless though. About an hour later, packing up. I'm stuffing some carp and bass into a cooler. Leroy's trying to get out of the tree. The base of the tree Leroy is in is on the other side of the river. He'd have to get out and then wade through the river and get to the other side where our houses / the road is. Can't see him, just hear him struggling in the brush. Hear the howl again and hear him scream Andrew. Rip the Bowie knife out of the tackle box and dash across the river to get him. He is bugging out on the other side of the river. The howling is crazy loud. Finally get across, light our oil lantern, and toss it into the bushes. Glass breaks. Fire erupts from it, catches some bushes on fire. Can see Leroy backed against the tree. Nose is bleeding, and there are some scrapes on his arm. Whatever it was is gone. Stomp out the fire. Nope the fuck out of there. As we're running, Leroy is hollering, "That wasn't no damn bobcat. That wasn't no damn bobcat." My house is closer. We run onto my porch. Wake up my girlfriend. Tell her to call the sheriff. Leroy's shirt is ripped up. Tell him to take it off. Scratches and shit. On his chest is a big red mark, similar to a human hand's, as if he had been slapped crazy hard. Can even make out the individual fingers. At the end of where each finger would be is a long gash, as if the thing had fucking claws. Gather our wits, try to calm down, and rationalize it as some kind of punk kid. I'm worried it's a psycho. Penitentiary one county over. Grab some guns and lanterns, not waiting on the sheriff to get up here. We left our cooler and fishing gear anyways. Uncle Choke, my neighbor, not my uncle or his real name, just what folks in the town call him, had heard us hollering, came out with his gun and lantern too. Get back to the river, find my gear. Leroy's is on the other side of the river still. Cooler is knocked over, fish are flopping around on the ground. Neither of us remember kicking it over. Several of the fish are missing. We had caught 9 or 10. There were only 3 or 4 left flopping around. Too far away from the river, would have killed themselves before they flopped back into the water. Toss fish back into water. We don't care at this point. Plenty of others. Wade back across river. Uncle Choke's losing his wits behind us. He's old, about mid to late 70s. Mumbling under his breath. Kind of unsettling. Get to where Leroy was attacked. Find his gear. Check the mud. See mine and his boot prints. Fucking human bare footprints. Leroy and I look at each other. Fucking pale as hell. Uncle Choke starts yelling into the woods. "Hey, you punks get out here, for I feel ya. Ain't no time to be slumping around the woods." No howling, nothing. Head downstream to where we first heard the howling. Mud turns to grass and brush. Lose tracks. Find bushes where it happened. Deer fucking mutilated, lying on the ground. Front legs gone. Chest ripped open. Tears all in its skin. Leroy and I heave. Uncle Choke hollers. Damn, thing is still alive. Sure enough, poor Doe is still blinking. Pupils dilated more than anything I've ever seen, as if there weren't anything but pupil. Smell of innards is overwhelming. Leroy and I still heaving. Uncle Choke puts it out with his 30-06. Rifle blast echoes through the whole mountain. Hear howling again, way far off though. Uncle Choke is hollering again. "Don't let me catch you boys. This ain't right. Y'all can get jail time for this, etc." Choke is hollering. Elbow Leroy and shine my lantern in front of us. Footprints again. "Leroy, shut up. Look here." Follow prints back into the woods. At this point, Sheriff Lorch has caught up with us. Prints are going the other way, towards the bushes. Really what we're doing is heading towards where the thing came from, not where it had headed. Could be back where it was though. Hasn't howled since Choki shot. Lorch thinks it's a good idea to shoot again. Choki shoots a birch a bit off from our footprint path. Thing fucking howls from a couple of yards behind us. All of us lose our shit. I throw my other lantern into the bushes like last time. Fire breaks out again. All of us catch a glimpse of a pale, completely hairless man dashing through the woods away from us. All of us but Lorch fucking fire in its direction. Howling getting further and further away. Lorch freaking out. Don't shoot, don't shoot. Leroy, Choki and I unload our rifles/shotguns. All four of us look at each other in our lantern light, scared shitless. Everyone reloads, walk back out of the woods, pick up our shit, go home for the night. Next day, all three sheriffs, me and Leroy, Choki, and some other folks head back into the woods. Deer is gone. Find the tree Choki shot. A tree behind where we had all stood and shot wildly at the thing is scratched and cut up. Obviously not deer rubbings. These are deep slashes. Find these on nearly all of the trees behind the tree Choki had shot. The thing had been following us. Head through the brush and search in the direction the thing had ran. Find some bullet holes in the trees where we had shot after it. In the brush and grass, find what looks like a pig run. Grass/brush pushed away to the side, sort of like a path. Blood in it. We had either hit it, or this is the way it dragged that deer. Follow pig, run single file, Leroy in front, followed by me, deputy sheriff, some kid like 19, Choki, other deputy, and finally Lorch. All of us have rifles, loaded and ready. Pig run leads all the way to the edge of the woods. At the end is the edge of the mountain, drops almost immediately, like 90 degrees. Endless valleys of trees and shit. Nobody lives there. Nobody goes there. Nobody owns this land. Only people who head back there are moonshiners and hunters. Too far down to see if the thing is down there. Fucking nope it, out of the woods. Sheriff calls search off. Only way for the thing to get back up the mountain and into our woods is through the town. Leroy and I try to shrug it off, still scared shitless. Choki in the bar in town, always telling the stories to traveling hikers of the psycho in the woods, and to never cross the river. Fucking nobody crosses the river anymore. Leroy and I still fish in that same place, can sometimes hear that howling again. Never hear it coming from our side of the river. Leroy's scratches were treated at the hospital a few counties over his animal wounds. We aren't the only people in town that have sighted it, but the only people who've been attacked by it. Even some of the hikers come back to the town, talking about some creepy-ass guy staring at them from the other side of the river. Okay, X, I've been wanting to tell you this for a while. For some background, I work in a petrol station located on the highway. Mostly night shifts, 3 PM to midnight, so I am used to the weird, the creepy, and the downright paranormal. But this, normal shift, people coming and going. It's about 7. Things are dark, and store is slowing down a bit. Behind console area. Look to my left and lock eyes. Not that I could, mind you, with a woman. Frail, thin, elderly, with wrinkled skin, and giant fly-eyed sunglasses on that cover half her face. Immediately get the jitters from her. She walks slowly to the door. I had to manually make it open to let her in, as the auto doors did not pick her up. Makes her way to the console. Stares at me. Can't tell. Still wearing those creepy sunnies. Can you come outside and take a look at my car? I think something is wrong. Voice is soft in volume, but deep and resonating, like I felt it more than I heard it. Decline. Explain policy with leaving is only staff on site. Okay then. She walks off to the toilet. Now, here is where alarm bells starting going off. Serving other customers, stragglers here and there. She comes out of the bathroom after 5 minutes. Walks over to me again. There's no toilet paper. Could you come get me some? Alarm bells. Something in my head says not to go out there. Get some staff toilet paper from behind the console. Here you go, ma'am. Her demeanor is sour, or as far as I can tell with those fucking sunnies. Okay. She walks back into the toilet. About another 5 minutes later, she walks back out and wanders around the shop. I watch her and notice she flicks her head in my direction every now and then, like she's scanning me. She walks to the coffee machine, then calls out to me. Her voice is louder this time, but it feels more like a knife this time, shrill and freezing. There is no milk in here. Can you replace it? I would like a coffee. I know I should do it, but fuck. Every something is fucking up alarm in my body and my brain was screaming not to. Decline and say I can't leave the console at this hour of the night. She gets visibly annoyed, saying how shitty my customer service is. She threatens to contact my manager if I don't come out and change the milk. Decline and apologize, even offer a manager's number. She tries 3 more times to get me out over the next 20 minutes. Finally, she gives up and walks off, glaring at me through the windows as she rounds the shop out of sight. Rest of the shift goes by without a hitch. No creepy things, surprisingly mellow and normal shift. Still have sense of dread in my stomach. Swap over and leave at 12:30 a.m., walking to my car about 50 meters away in the parking lot. As I get closer, the fucking glasses, scarf, and gloves she was wearing folded neatly, the glasses resting on top, in a pile on the ground by my driver's side door. Look around, sense of dread intensifying. Quick as a flash, I unlock my car, jump in, and lock it again. No time to relax, start car, and gun it out of there. Never been so fearful in my life. That sense of dread never left. I got home and needed a few drinks before I could loosen up enough to even consider sleep. Okay, here is a story. Be 15 years old. Just got my first personal .22 rifle. All mine. Super proud. Little bolt thing. Super accurate. Loved it. Have a family friend who owns property like a 10 minutes drive away from our house. On this property is an old house, built by homesteaders around 100 years ago, falling apart. Right next to it is a creek and a field. We used to camp on the far side of the field all of the time. Also would shoot using creek as a berm. One day I decide I want to go camping. Bike out there with my .22, a box of ammo, and a normal camping kit. Super excited. Shoot like 200 rounds at cans and shit from the trash hole nearby. In the 60s, someone lived on the property in a trailer and threw trash in this sinkhole type thing. Started getting dark, built a fire, and busted out the harmonica to practice. I was terrible at it, but it kept my mind busy whilst I relaxed. Suddenly, something is not right. I feel like I'm being watched. Hair on neck is raised, heart elevated. My mind starts racing, imagining things unseen out there. Clutching rifle and flashlight, scanning the field and trees for movement. Shadows playing tricks on my mind, and I am shitting bricks. Moonless night. God damn it. I want to go home now. Wish I'd brought a tent at least to hide inside. It was summer in Texas and was too hot, but I wanted that security now. Started building a bigger fire. Made a torch of sorts with a stick and a torn up t-shirt that I'd brought along with thoughts of making some sort of camouflage for my rifle. Darkness is giving up no secrets, but I can definitely hear something out there walking around. Didn't want to shoot because sometimes cows wander onto the property. Fuck. I never wanted this. Maybe coyotes. They are common out here. But no, not in this particular area. Too many farmers and rednecks hunt them. They avoid it. Jesus Christ, I think I hear breathing. It's kind of circling me, getting closer. Pissing pants at this point, wishing I had something big bore. This was before cell phones were inexpensive. I did not have one. I just told my parents that I was going camping and where. Great, so they will just find my grisly remnants tomorrow morning after I don't come home. Sweating buckets and running out of wood. Fire is dying. Contemplating running for it, but the woodsman in me would not leave the fire. It was too dry out there. Then suddenly, I hear a deep echoing bark from kinda far off. The thing circling me stops for a second, a long pause, and then another bark, closer, and the thing takes off in the direction away from me and the bark. An enormous, white fluffy dog comes trotting out of the tree line, super friendly, has a collar on it that says Snowman. Snowman and I chill out for a few hours. Only once he turns his head, perks his ears and growls, half barks, and then goes back to normal. Feel totally safe with Snowman there. Eventually fall asleep with the big lug next to me. Hot as hell, but who gives a fuck? Next morning, Snowman is gone. Figure he went home after the thing boogered off for good. Go home and scrape the brick dust out of my boxers. Next day, talking to property owner. Tell him of that night. Confirm no cows were out there. Mention Snowman. He looks at me like I am an asshole. Snowman was my dog. He was killed by a car last year. I walked hard and tell him I was serious. Snowman was real. I petted him and got covered in his white hair and everything, and he just saved my skin from whatever was out there that wanted my nutsack for a coin purse. He doesn't believe me until I dig the shirt out of the wash and show him the hair all over it. He says it looks just like Snowman's. Every now and then, I hear a bark off in the distance while camping there and feel warm inside.